to show you some of the second batch of miniature figures I made, and then I called them the Little People retrospectively. At the time they were just a bunch of a couple of hundred small figures, all 1/12 scale. Initially I tried making them 1/24 scale, but it was simply too small to make the clothes look realistic and cope with the bulk of real fabrics. And I'm very glad I didn't make any more than one in 1/24 scale. Sorry about the noise of the traffic, but it's so hot today I've had to open the window and put a fan on. So the Little People were made when I can't remember if I was 26 or 27. I just got over quite a long and serious illness, and again I didn't really know what to do with myself as before when I made the very small figures when I was 21 or 22. This time I was in quite a different place. For the first time in my life I felt I might be able to do exactly what I wanted, and what I wanted was to kind of get up and leave, to go on a train. It was summertime, to go on a train and do something to do with music. And that was what my body was telling me to do, but my mind was telling me to finish a project I'd started when I was 24, when I made the first few Little People in 1/12 scale, but I hadn't been able to finish it because then I got ill with something called ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome. So when I recovered, or 80% recovered from ME or chronic fatigue syndrome, instead of doing what my body told me to do, I did what my head told me to do, and I embarked upon the enormous project, which actually grew as I went along, of making, modelling, wiring, costuming and wigging a couple of hundred very small people. Mostly this took place at night because I felt better at night than I did in the day. And I did them in batches, so I do 50 heads, 70 pairs of shoes, 30 jackets, 20 pinafores, and I had heaps of heads and legs and arms and bodies and articles of clothing and hats and umbrellas and spectacles and spats and baskets, all on every surface of a bedroom in the eaves of a thatched cottage my mum and I lived in at the time on the edge of the New Forest. I roped my mum into helping me make some of the clothes for the Little People because I'd never made anything with fabric before. I was never even interested in material or fabric. But there was a heck of a lot of sewing and even tiny pattern making for these Little People. And my mum, being the stellar person that she is, helped me no end, and well, I was going to say we both drove each other around the bend. I drove her around the bend, but we finished every single outfit to a pretty amazing standard considering we'd never done anything like that before, and I wigged all the Little People. I'm not sure if the costuming or the wigging was the hardest part, but it certainly wasn't modelling the faces, because by this time I'd cracked how to make a skull. To begin with, how I cracked this was by taking a sketch of a skull or a character's face, and I should say none of these Little People are anatomically correct. They're all either cartoon characters or fairy tale characters or caricatures of say, well-known figures like John Bull or the Tooth Fairy or Father Christmas or a court jester or something like that. And I would take the outline of the face on a piece of paper and pack clay around the outline of the face on the paper, and then I would slice half the silhouette of clay off, build it up a little bit more so it was roughly half a head shape, bake it, then I would make the other side and I would look at it from the front, and I'd build it up from the front with cheekbones, chin, nose, forehead, etc. And bit by bit I learned to exactly recreate any particular character or face I wanted to, and in the process learned the basic shape of a skull, and then I could from that time on sculpt freehand, as it were, or sculpt by simply taking a bit of clay and sculpting the head from scratch without bothering about a silhouette or doing half the skull and then putting the other half together. And this was a revelation to me, to actually finally understand in practice how to sculpt a skull. Incidentally, probably what helped was, oh, my storage is full. As I was saying before my battery died, while I was ill, some of the things I was doing to get better, one of the things was going to a sculpture class, and in the class I learned how to make human heads, skulls, and learned the shape, so that probably helped a lot. In fact, we weren't taught anything in the class, but we got to use a space where we got clay. In any case, I got to experiment with making skulls, and it paid off. At the end of making the little people, just as I was finishing the last couple of hundred in January or February, I developed RSI in my arms and had to have them in slings for 2 years. So unfortunately, the mania resulted in another long illness. I was told to put my arms in slings, but it turns out the doctor and the physiotherapist, the GP and the physiotherapist, were completely wrong about that, and I'll tell you about that in another video. But basically, the little people resulted in the land of decoration coming about, because while my arms were in slings, I couldn't do anything but speak or walk around, but you know, you can't really do that much productive by walking around. And so, using speech recognition software, I began to dictate some novels, and one of the novels was The Land of Decoration. People who've read The Land of Decoration think that probably the little people, if they're aware of them, came about as a result of the novel, because it's about a little girl who makes a model world in her bedroom full with rubbish and thrown away things, and in the model world there are little people, but in fact the little people came first, and as a result of them the Land of Decoration came about. So it was quite fitting and a happy coincidence that they were used to launch the Land of Decoration in Random House, and I'll insert a few photos of them in the foyer along with copies of the Land of Decoration. And now, without further ado, I'll show you some of the little people which are in this cabinet, and then a couple that are dotted around the bedroom. First of all, there is this fairy, which I have, how have I managed to, aha, I've clipped her to this little rack. Now this fairy, my mum and I were very pleased with. My mum, because she made the little dress, and me because the fairy turned out just as I wanted. Sorry about the noise of the traffic. This fairy is rather dusty at the moment, but you can see she has a podgy little face, which I wanted. She actually looks a bit like my Auntie Anne. Sorry, Auntie Anne. She's actually very pretty, Auntie Anne. She has a podgy little face. She has a podgy little body, little cleavage, and her face has faded a little bit now. Her wings, I think, we picked up in some sort of craft shop or on some glitzy kitsch toy. And her dress is made from real silk, I think. And my mum made each layer of the skirt very painstakingly. Because the fairy is so chubby, you can see her enormous bloomers and bottom. The body is hard, all hard fimo, and the limbs are joined with wire. Because she's so chubby, my mum had to make more or less concentric circles of fabric and just cut them out without any pleats at all. And then we just sprayed a heck of a lot of spray starch on the fairy to try and make the skirt sit down a little bit. And on each of her shoes, her slippers, there's a little silver star, as there is on her headdress and her wand, although one of the stars has come off this little shoe. So there's the fairy. pop her back here for now. We also have here, sitting on this cotton reel, one of a pair of shoemakers. He's very old. He has on a red cap, and he has in his hands the shapes of some shoes he's been cutting out. I don't know if you can see. There. The shapes of some shoes. He's kind of a pixie gentleman or an elf. He has little clogs on his feet. He has sort of long johns, a tunic, a very, very long beard, and an apron. And I was very pleased with him as well. Then we have someone called the Wanderer. Now the Wanderer is a tramp. He has string for a belt, corduroy trousers, unfortunately he's dusty as well, corduroy trousers with torn bottoms. His shoes are Fimo. I should just say as well that all the limbs of all these figures, the limbs, the head and the bodies are made with the modelling clay. And while the modelling clay is soft, wire is poked into the neck, a hole in the neck, the tops of the arms, the tops of the body, the pelvis and the top of the legs. Then all 5 separate parts are baked, and when they're hard and after they've come out of the oven, wire is super glued into all the holes and they're joined together. So the limbs, most of the limbs move on the people. And then if, say, there's a space between where the wire comes out of the shoulder and where the hard Fimo arm begins at the elbow, I would wrap wool around the bare wire to fill out the limb. And then more often than not, I would glue clothes on, because these people are far too small to have removable clothes, although some of the clothes are removable, but mostly they're glued on. So to go back to the Wanderer, he has a topsy-turvy top hat, a battered top hat, which I made through soaking fabric in glue and pretty much sculpting into that shape. He has a very jolly kind of rollicking face. He has deliberately threadbare seams. His jumper shows through his battered jacket. This was an old t-shirt I had, his stripy scarf. His holey gloves, his fingerless gloves, are wool from a jumper. I think we picked up the corduroy in a second-hand shop, which is a little bit thick, but never mind. His scarf is actually supposed to tuck into that that piece of string belt like that. And then his knapsack is a toothpick with a bit of striped fabric on the back, and I forget what I put inside it. I think I actually moulded Fimo to go inside it. And he was a very complicated figure to make, and I was really, really, really pleased with the way he turned out. Then we've got, I think, a gentleman, I would say, from possibly the Restoration or Tudor times. I'm not great on history. He has buckles on his shoes, tweed-like trousers, a real velvet jerkin or waistcoat. Again, he's a little bit dusty. I think I called him Edmund. And the only thing I didn't make was the pipe, which is from a doll's house shop and is supposed to be a long clay pipe. And Edmund has a chair that he sits in, a nicely backed chair, but unfortunately I didn't have room for all the furniture that goes with the people, and the furniture is at home. So at the moment he's sitting on a little vase. Now, some of the people were not made at this time, quite a few years later, when I was probably 30 something, and I decided to try making much bigger figures than I had before, and this is one of them. I think I called her Dinah. She has a tartan dress and a kind of sailor collar and very dark hair. And surprisingly enough, the bigger figures were a lot harder to make than the little figures. And I didn't think that would be the case, but it is. So I found that the perfect scale for me to make figures is 112. I'd say these were possibly 116. They're kind of Sindy doll size, and they're quite heavy. They're made with exactly the same materials, Fimo, then wire joining the limbs, and fabric and mohair or viscose and acrylic paints. And down here, sitting on top of my books, we've got another small person, not one of the little people, but one of my experiments in a slightly bigger scale. Lucy has a very pretty face, almost a modelish kind of face. I spent a long time making the little skull. She has almost pinkish hair and a blue check outfit. Then we have some very tiny pixies I put in jars, which were part of the little people I made when I was getting over the illness. I think this one's called Pipkin and Blackberry. Blackberry is the smallest, this very smallest I made at that time. He's not much bigger than, well, half the size of my little finger, I'd say. And his limbs don't move. He's just moulded to be as he is because he's so small. And then beneath that we've got, I think this is, if I can shake them around so you can see, Apple Drop and Bilberry. And unfortunately they're very, very dusty. If only someone would invent something to eliminate dust, that would be amazing. Then we've got someone who's actually sneezing from dust in this cabinet here. This gentleman at the back. So this is this chap I think I just called the figure a pinch of snuff. And he's sneezing and getting out his handkerchief. He's missing a button on his herringbone suit. He has the type of shoes I made on lots of the figures at the time. And he has a formal jacket. I made patterns for these jackets. They're actually sewn in panels, and each had to be modified because each figure was slightly different. Taller, shorter, fatter, thinner, hunched, very straight. And this little man has just 3 tufts of hair. And the collar is paper. I did lots of collars like this, and paper in the end seemed to be the best bet, although it doesn't really last as well as fabric. So I just cut a very sharp paper collar. And then we have a tiny little figure here called Miss Mary Banks. She is meant to sit in a high chair, and she's meant to be having a tantrum. She has a silk organza dress, a big frown, 2 tiny little bunches, very tiny hands. I'm sorry the focus is so bad. And tiny little metal shoes. I actually bought the shoes, I think, in a doll's house shop and fitted the Fimo legs too. Hopefully you can see her a little bit better there. Another larger doll who's called Ruby and has very dark red hair, a little cotton dress, and a very, very fine woolen cardigan. I was very lucky to find really fine wool. And again, I'd say she's probably 1/16 size. I think she's my favourite of the larger dolls I made. And then in these jars, hanging from my little makeshift blue crate cupboard, we've got some of the 7 dwarves. I think I called this one Jeremiah. And I think I called this one Simeon. Or perhaps Jethro, I can't quite remember. And then in this jar here, we've got the second model I ever made, who's called the Jailer, and who's a cross-looking dwarf holding a bunch of keys. I'll take this down and show you him. A little bit dusty, even though he's been in a jar. I was delighted with the Jailer because he was the first, his one ear is broken. He was the first really extreme character face I made, and I was really pleased with the way his hands turned out as well. I guess I was in a very good mood when I made him, and I really wanted to make him. It makes a big difference if you want to do what you're doing at that time. My mum and I also found a shop in Ringwood, I think it was, which sold tiny, no it wasn't actually, I don't know where we got these bits of real leather from, but we managed to find very fine leather and suede, which were a godsend when I was making these little figures, because his belt, and his wristbands, I don't know what they're called, I'm sorry the camera's not focusing, and his leather waistcoat are all leather. Then he has a muslin cotton top, corduroy trousers, and moulded Fimo shoes. Then also in the jar we've got a little boy called Ben, who's from a different set of people that I made a little bit later on, called the Duckworths, who are supposed to be a modern family, or rather a family from the sort of late 1980s. And he appears in one of the children's stories I illustrated by means of making sets for these little people in the story The Night the Moon Went Out, or Eclipse. This little cardigan we bought in a doll's house shop. It's really knitted, and there's no way we could, well, we could have knitted this, but it would have taken a long time. These jeans are real doll's jeans, and these shoes are moulded doll's house miniature shoes. So with the older clothes that most of the little people are dressed in, we made them, but with the modern clothes sometimes we were lucky enough to find clothes that fitted the figure. And then lastly in the jar there's another figure from the Duckworths. This time I can't remember her name, but she's a toddler, I'd say about 2 or 3. And again, I managed to find the pink shoes in some doll's house shop. They're solid, either ceramic or metal, and I moulded the Fimo legs into them and then glued jersey. I think the white tights were once a pair of knickers of mine, the knitted cotton type, which the very fine ribbing makes lends itself really well to the kind of ribbing in tights of this scale. And then she's also fully posable, and I wish I could remember her name. Anyway, she's also from the Duckworth series. So then I think that's it for little people scattered around the room. The rest of them are, I'm pretty sure, are all in this display case. But since this video has become quite long already, I'll devote the next video to opening the display case.